Today's webinar is presented to us by renowned maritime history expert and co-founder of shipindex.org, Mr. Peter McCracken. I'm not going to waste a lot of time because I'm sure he has a lot of information to share with you. So I'm just going to turn it over to him. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you. It's so great to be here. I'll go ahead and select the correct screen to share. And then I want to just, I will take a moment just to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Peter McCracken. I'm a co-founder of shipindex.org. And during the day, I'm a librarian at Cornell University, which is something I'll talk about a little bit because having access to university resources is important and can be important and useful in research. I am originally from Seattle, and I now live in Ithaca, New York, but I actually have a lot of Ohio connections. I went to college just outside Cleveland at Oberlin College. My son is now a student there as well. My father grew up in northern Kentucky, and my grandfather was an executive at Procter & Gamble. My uncle was working there. My aunt is still in Ohio, in the Cincinnati area, and two of my aunt and uncle's sons are still there. So I've had a lot of connections with Ohio. I went back to Cincinnati about 4 weeks ago for a conference where I got to see cousins and for any Reds fans who may be in the audience, I got to see Elly De La Cruz's first 2 games. The second one with some Dodgers fans, so that was really fantastic. So I may be a Mariners fan at heart, but I also have a soft spot for the Reds as well. I'm going to talk today about how to do research on ships and why I think it matters and how it can be useful, particularly in genealogy. I will talk a bit about my website, shipindex.org, but I'm going to give you some other ideas as well of ways to do searching for ships and beyond that as well. I want to talk about how to use those university databases and when you can use them, and then some kind of tricks in how you can do research with those many databases that universities subscribe to, even if you cannot go to the university. You can search collections from some of the biggest universities in the world safely and legally. Can't get to the last bits of content, but I'm going to share some information in how you do that. So first of all, the question would be, why does vessel research matter in genealogy? What's the benefit there? Before I go there, I do want to share with everyone, there is not a handout, but I do have a website which I've just put into the chat, which has the notes essentially for this presentation. It's a blog post from my website, and I intend to update it a little bit based on what we talk about here. And so I think I hope you'll find it useful so you can follow along, and it's at least a place to record some of the more complex information that I hope to talk about. So I intend to roughly follow along what I'm seeing there, but we'll see how closely that happens. So to talk a little bit about using vessel research in genealogy, I think what's really important is thinking about where to using the right tool for the right resource. If you're looking for an individual person, you're probably not going to find that in ShipIndex. And if you're looking for a specific vessel, you're not going to find that in the large sort of person-focused databases. So if you don't know the name of the vessel that an ancestor emigrated on, ShipIndex is not going to help you in that case. But of course, there's Find My Past and MyHeritage and Family Search and all of these other much larger databases that really do focus on people, and they can be very helpful in finding the vessel that an ancestor emigrated on. Now, if you know the ship that an ancestor emigrated on, you can learn a lot more about it. You might find a picture of it. There might be some other things you can do. You might want to find, there are a couple of different things you can do. It might range from finding an image of the ship that an ancestor emigrated on or served on, or even just celebrated their honeymoon on. If you just want to add a picture of that vessel to add, leaves to the tree, as we say, I think that can be very useful. But you can also learn a whole lot more about your ancestors in doing vessel research. If you know that an ancestor was on a specific vessel during in a war period or something like that, you know what ship they were on, and you know the dates that they were on those vessels, those ships, then if you do research about the history of that vessel, you can learn what their experiences were, even if you don't find a mention of your ancestor specifically. So that's an area where I think we can learn a lot about the experiences that our ancestors went through by learning about the vessels that they served on or they sailed on or anything like that. So that's a little bit of what I think is really useful when doing research on a specific ship. Also, if you're looking for information about a particular vessel, related to your local history, that can also be quite useful as well. As you'll, as I note in the in that blog post, basically, you'll find you might have a panorama of the river's bank, and you'd like to learn about the vessels that you see there. And when I was in Cincinnati, I did get to take a look at that in the public library. So that was pretty neat as well. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about what Ship Index does. Right now on the screen, you can see the Ship Index website. I am not logged in. The database offers over 150,000 citations that are completely free for anyone to use, and you don't even need to put your email address in. Remember that, if somebody says something's free, but they're requiring your email address, it's not really as free as you might think. But I'm going to do a search for one of my favorite vessels, the Monongahela, and I'm going to show you, I'm not going to log in, I'm going to show you what you see if you are not logged in. Now I'm going to talk about these different cards in a little bit. You can see that there are these resources that are in the subscription database, and then there are other resources that are in the free database. We see that Monongahela, a Philadelphia packet of the 1830s, is mentioned in Volume 2 of William Fairburn's Merchant Sail. Merchant Sail is a really fantastic resource. It was like a 6 or 7 volume collection that this guy wrote in Maine, and published it from 1945 to 55, and then he just mailed copies to libraries across the country. So you'll find it in a lot of libraries across the country. And the point here is that we've got resources that talk about vessels from all different parts of maritime history. They're not specifically focusing on genealogy. We're looking at all different kinds of history of vessels at sea. So we find a lot of entries here, actually, just in the subscription, in the free database, rather. And then some are in the subscription database. And so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to log in, which is easy enough for me to do because I've saved my password information there. And now I have 99 citations. These are records that are not associated with one of these ship cards that I have here. Now, we know that there are lots of vessels that share the same name. If there are, I think, 8 or 9 USS Wasps, for example. And as the database got larger, there's now 3.3 million citations in the subscription database. It became harder and harder to know which ship each citation was referring to. So we've been able to differentiate these in a lot of instances. So this is a particular ship, the USS Monongahela, a cargo ship in the United States Navy. And these are entries that specifically reference this particular Monongahela, as opposed to other ships named Monongahela. And this information is pulled from Wikidata. I use a Wikidata identifier that's a little bit more complex, but it's what helps me differentiate between all these ships. Now I'm looking at a bunch of other entries here, and if I find there's one I particularly enjoy because, as I said, I'm from Seattle. This is this great picture of the Monongahela being towed from Lake Union during the construction of the Aurora Bridge in Seattle. It was going to get stuck behind the Aurora Bridge if they didn't move it to another location. So we can find this image pretty quickly and pretty easily using the subscription database. It's a pretty straightforward database. It's I'm logged in, so I don't have the pricing here. It's $6 for 2 weeks of access, up to $65 for a year, and I also offer institutional subscriptions as well to libraries, museums, genealogical societies, etc. So I'm going to try another one. This one came up pretty recently. Stafford. We can say that someone served on the Stafford. You can see this Stafford is obviously a vessel that was probably used in World War II. And there are a couple of other shipping vessels. There was one that I saw that we just added that I found kind of interesting. Here's a Stafford that was a whaling ship. There's just so many different vessels. And this has a passenger or a crew list. In this case, of course, it's a crew list. So here are the individuals who actually served on that particular vessel based on this database from the city of New Bedford, Massachusetts. There was another one I saw. And these are pretty neat. These are directories that have been digitized by Mystic Seaport Museum, and we've worked with them to be able to bring in records. These are an annual register. So down here we find 2 different ships named Stafford, one from Kingston, Mississippi. Perhaps it must be an MA from Massachusetts. I'm not sure. I really don't know. And then another one from Quebec. So these are the kind of things that you will find in the database. And I want to repeat that it's all kinds of information from lots of different maritime sources, not just focusing on genealogy. Now I don't remember which was the one that I particularly wanted to show. So I'm going to continue on. We've got over 1,000 different resources that are in the database, and so there's all kinds of things that you can find there. And then if we're looking at that, I'll just bring over the here we go. So this is the sort of the guide that I created for today's session. There are a whole bunch of other resources beyond Ship Index, of course. For instance, there's down a link here to ship registers from New Bedford. These are not just whaling voyages, but others. Lloyd's Register of Ships Online has got a lot of information, and it's not in a way that I can yet add it to the database. Now, I want to move forward and talk about some other ways of doing searching. And of course, we all use Google quite a lot, and there's no reason not to. It's pretty useful. But if you're trying to learn something about the vessel Constellation, for example, and you type in Constellation, you're stuck. You're not going to see anything that's relevant probably for quite a long time. And so I'd like to point out the importance of using this, the benefits of using this around operator. So I'm just going to use that, and I'm going to try this search now. Actually, you know what? I wasn't actually searching in Google there, so I'll do the Constellation search first, get similar results from what I had seen in that other one. And now if I put in, I use that around and then sloop of war, I'm going to see very different results. It's looking for the phrase sloop of war within 5 words on either side of the word Constellation. And so now we are really getting to a vessel very quickly. So if you are looking for a particular vessel through a search engine like Google, you can use that around operator and the type of ship it is, or even just ship. You could do schooner or brig or bark or brigantine if you have that information, or just ship or boat or vessel or something like that. Now, I'm going to go back to Ship Index, and I'd like to go back to my Monongahela example, because it's important to note what you cannot do here in a way. In here's Monongahela. It's mentioned in Battle Report Victory in the Pacific, and that's great, but I don't have a link to that resource. Actually, sometimes I do have a link to that page if it's available in HathiTrust or in Google Books, but otherwise, I don't have the ability to manage copyright allowances and stuff like that. But I do have a link to find this in a library. Now, this takes me to OCLC. Some of you may be familiar with OCLC. It's based in Dublin, Ohio, and it is a not-for-profit organization that helps people locate. It's a service. It's a nonprofit member service for libraries to help them catalog their books and make their keep track of what they own. And it has the opportunity to provide a lot of great information, but it has changed a lot over the last couple of years and is not nearly as useful as it used to be. And that's pretty frustrating, but it is just sort of the way it is. So I was looking for this Victory in the Pacific book. I find 2 editions in 8 libraries. We have the silly featured libraries versus all libraries, and it's the same number of libraries, and you see there's only 1 library in the United States that has this book. Well, that's pretty difficult to believe, especially since I think I checked it out of the library right 2 miles from my house. So I'm checking these different versions to see if they'll help me find this particular book in other libraries. I find this so I'm going to try searching just for the book directly. And, so I searched for Victory in the Pacific in the title, and this should clearly be, this book should be above this book. The results are pretty bad these days. We know this isn't the book that we're looking for because we know it was by Carrig, not Marin, and not 1983. And then we find, so I don't even find these are some of the problems that we're experiencing now with OCLC and with WorldCat. And I just pointed out because it has gotten to be so difficult to use. Here it is, Battle Report Victory in the Pacific. See, now I've searched again and I discover that Ithaca College has a copy of it. SUNY Cortland has a copy. Hamilton College still doesn't. Now it's showing the libraries that are nearest to me in Ithaca, New York, and it's still not showing me Cornell University. So these are some of the challenges that we find in using OCLC these days. But unfortunately, we don't have any other option. Well, that's not completely true. This is perhaps still the best option, but I think it's important to have a sense of the challenges that come from using WorldCat these days. It did not used to be this difficult to use. One thing that you do have in Ohio, of course, is you've got Ohio Link. And so I'm going to try, here's Ohio Link, and maybe I'll Battle Report, what was it? Victory in the Pacific, I think. If this doesn't, yeah. This is actually a much nicer result. It says that one library has this title. I would expect that quite a few more would actually, but they say that just Ohio Wesleyan has a copy of it. I'm going to guess there are a lot more in there, maybe because it's just under Battle Report Victory in the Pacific is the subheading, which does make it a little bit harder to look. But here's another one. Here's Carrig as well. Battle Report. 19 libraries have this title. That's a lot more likely. That makes a lot more sense. That, many libraries in the state have got access to this, the full collection. You see, 4 copies of volume 1 and multiple copies of the other volumes as well. So you may find it easier to use a HioLink at times, in fact, for locating the books that would be most useful to you. Now I'm going to shift a little bit now and talk about looking for vessels, but also it can be anything else in historical newspapers online. And this is a great place to find a lot of information about ships, but it can be pretty difficult too. Now I've put in the link here this link to locate digitized historical newspapers. I think this is a really fantastic list to look at. You see, it's digitized newspaper archives from around the world, and anybody can add to this. And in fact, I was just an hour ago, I was responding to a question from someone who was looking for vessels in Philadelphia. And I found that the URL was wrong in here, so I corrected that. Someone else contacted me the other day about looking for vessels that might have been in a shipwreck in Nova Scotia. And I suggested that maybe finding newspapers from that area could be the best way to go. But what you can find here is places that have got, like the, okay, so that's just obituaries, but you'll find other resources that could be very helpful. Now, it's important to note that sometimes searching these can be very difficult or not even possible in some cases. So you have to take a look at it, but you can see that there are quite a few newspapers that are included in this Ohio Memory Project, for example. But of course, we're looking for people from all across the country. And even if you're in Ohio now, you probably are looking for ancestors who were in other states as well. I would like to highlight one incredible resource that I discovered recently, and that is this California digital newspaper collection. Because what you can do here is, as you go into it, we know that newspapers are very hard to do OCR, or optical character recognition, on, to convert the image of that page to text that can then be searched. And there are a lot of attempts at doing this, and things like the Chronicling America project at the Library of Congress, they've digitized thousands of American newspapers, and they've tried to do OCR work on them, but it's very difficult. But what they have done here with this project is they've made it possible for anyone to edit the content. And I have kind of gotten really involved in doing that. I found it really just great fun to do. And I have found a lot of shipping information. This is a San Francisco call from August of 1922. And you can see all of this shipping information here. I'm going to get in a little bit closer so we can see a little bit. So we've got arrived, and you can see the text here is pretty bad, right? Because no one has corrected that. Coast Ports is a fair bit better, because I spent some time yesterday transcribing this and making corrections, and it's changed immediately. So if you're not sure what to do with your time, going in and making edits using this Viridian software that's on this California digital newspaper site is just incredible. I think I'm quite impressed with it. So I think it's a pretty neat resource, and I hope that other projects all across the country will do this, use this software too, so that anybody can make edits and make this stuff discoverable. It's really, really great. Now I'd like to shift a little bit now and talk about using university libraries to do research. We know that now this is free, right? This is fantastic. This is free, although someone is paying a lot of money to make this work. But there are lots of other databases with historical information that academic and public and state libraries offer to patrons. And there's a lot that you can do with this research. And so I want to highlight that. And I'm going to go to Cornell because I do have access to the resources here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some ways of doing research when you do have access to those databases, and then doing research when you don't have access to those subscription databases. And what I think it's really important to say first is that most academic libraries, when they sign contracts with the database vendors, they try to make sure that walk-in users can also use those resources. This is especially true with public universities. And you may not realize it, but Cornell University is kind of like two universities. Part of us is a private university, but part of us is public university. Cornell is the land-grant university for the state of New York. So we take it really, it's very important that we are open and available to anyone who walks in our doors. It doesn't mean that you, and I believe you will find this in many different academic libraries, if it's especially if it's a public university. You will certainly have exceptions to that rule, but it's worth calling and finding out before you go. So I'm going to go to historical newspapers. There's a, whoops, I'm into ProQuest historical newspapers. I actually want to go to all historical newspapers, but well, this will just be looking at this is just looking at the New York collection. So ProQuest is a company that provides a lot of databases to libraries, and they have a huge collection of historical newspapers. And that's because they used to be UMI, University Microfilms Incorporated, or something like that. They have this huge vault that has microfilms for all of these newspapers. And if you ever wrote a dissertation, or you know someone who wrote a dissertation, almost certainly if that dissertation was published in the United States, there's a microfilm copy of it, or now a digital copy of it, in the ProQuest vaults. So ProQuest has been collecting these historical newspapers for a long time, and they make a lot of this available. And it's important to note that there are many, it's not like one historical newspapers database. Each library is going to subscribe to as many of the historical newspapers as their budget will allow. At Cornell, we have a fairly large budget, so we're able to subscribe to a lot of them. We're based in New York, so of course we have the New York collection. If you were to go to Ohio State, well, they have almost certainly have an even bigger budget, so they've probably subscribed to even more of these historical newspaper collections. If you go to a smaller library in the state, you may find fewer databases, and it's important to check to see if they have historical newspaper databases for the areas that are of interest to you. And in Ohio, you have a range of databases via the Ohio Web Library, but that does not include historical newspapers. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to go into this database here, and I want to do a search for Monongahela, and I am going to do, and of course there are other Monongahelas. There's the river, and there's the forest and other things. So I'm going to go Monongahela near Cargo and see what it brings up. So interestingly, it didn't bring up. I'm going to change this actually and try to go to more databases. I'd like to find all of the okay, actually, I'm going to jump back because I want to try to do this. It may be true that I have an ulterior motive here. We'll see. I didn't. I said historical databases, but I meant historical newspapers. This is a broader collection of pretty much all of the historical names, and it remembered that I had searched, so it wanted to do this. We're searching lots of historical newspapers, and so what I'm looking at now are all different, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. These are from 1984. Here's from 1961. Here's from 1865. So we've got a lot of coverage here. here's from one from the New York Herald Tribune in 1931. And as I was preparing, I saw this particular article and I thought, oh, hey, well, let's take a look at that. That's kind of interesting. That's intriguing to me because I recognize the name of Alan Villiers. And he wanted to create a race from Australia, a grain race from Australia, and wanted an American vessel to participate in the race. And so this article is describing his proposal to get that started, which was proposed, I guess, at the New York Athletic Club. And as we head down through the list of entries, and we see a mention down at the bottom here that says that Monongahela is in Puget Sound, and might be a competitor in this race. And of course, we saw that ship in the image of Monongahela in Seattle. And when I saw this, I thought, oh my goodness, this has got to be the basis for this book that Villiers wrote, Grain Race. He wrote a lot of books in maritime history. A lot of them, the indexes to them are in the database, but to discover that was, I thought, pretty neat. So I wanted to share that. Now, I have, of course, gone into the particular database here. Let's see, I'm searching in this one. I'm going to go back to the results and try something else. Shipping arrivals. This is what I think this is pretty interesting to me. I'd love to understand this better. Here's 1875. Here's a record of shipping arrivals into from the Times of India, arrivals into Calcutta and Jeddah and other cities, departures to London and Liverpool. There's a lot of really valuable, interesting information here that I think is not, well, it's not easy to uncover. I'd love to find a way to make it more visible and more discoverable. My guess is that given the quality of this scan here, which is from a microfilm, it would be very difficult for anything to actually read, any OCR software to read that. So these are a couple of things that you can do when you can get into the databases. Now, if you are not able to get to a campus, or if a large campus near you won't allow unaffiliated visitors to use their resources, there's actually another tool you still can use. And just to go back a little bit, about 15 years ago, when libraries were really trying to figure out ways to essentially compete with Google, because Google finds all of these web pages out on the open web, they index them, and then they make it available for people to search. They're not searching these subscription databases. And so libraries wanted to find a way to search multiple subscription databases all at once. And that was pretty hard to do because each one has got a different interface and they do different things. And there are all these copyright limitations, things like that. But products appeared which make this possible. And these are called discovery layers. And there are two companies that have the most common discovery layers. One is ProQuest. I've mentioned ProQuest before, and the other is a company called EBSCO. And each of these companies has to sign contracts with all of these other databases to allow the content from that database to appear in the discovery layer. ProQuest isn't going to let their content go into the EBSCO database, and EBSCO isn't going to let their content go into the ProQuest database. So what we can, and I should say that this tool, this discovery layer, can be searched on the web without needing to subscribe to or needing to log in to indicate that you are affiliated with that library, at least in most cases. It really depends for each library. So there's this is why I created that blog page to highlight all of this information and try to explain it a little bit so that you can see what I'm talking about. This is from this library, Technology Databases, Technology Guides, and I'll go there in a moment. But what you want to do is try to find a library in the Ex Libris CDI section. Ex Libris is a part of ProQuest, and so their discovery layer will allow you to search it, and it will have, the Ex Libris one will have a lot of it will have access to whatever content the library is subscribing to. So if you choose a very large library, and I have the Association of Research Libraries, which is the 110 or so largest libraries in the US and Canada, then you can almost certainly search those historical newspaper databases. Now you can see, I mean, the largest ones, here's Harvard, here's Yale. I saw Yale on here, so I figured I'd give it a try. And I did discover that the Yale database will allow access, and actually goes a little bit even further. So I'm going to follow the link to the library website. And what I want to show you the experience here, so you have a sense of what to look for. And then I might try it in another database, another library that I haven't tried before. We are searching for, well, actually, let's just do a search right here. So I'm going to do that Monongahela and your Euler search again, just because I've done that search before. We'll see what we can find. I have not logged in. I have no connection with Yale. I don't have a login at Yale. You can be doing exactly this search at home, wherever you are, and you will get the same results that I am getting right now. So, newspaper articles. I'm going to limit my results just to newspaper articles, because newspaper articles are pretty useful, and they're a useful thing to search. And you can see that we found some pretty interesting results here. Now, what I cannot do, here's a thing from the New York Herald Tribune. I cannot get into this particular content because now I have to log in. And as I said, I don't have any login information. But if I see that the article looks good, let's see if they'll allow a quick look. They will, so I can see a little bit more information here. So obviously that, I can see, that one's actually not about the Monongahela, the ship. This one is. If I were doing a little bit of research about the Euler Monongahela, I might say, I'd like to learn about what happened here. This is from the Austin American Statesman. I can say, okay, I'd really like to learn more about this. Now I can take the information about this from the Austin American Statesman on November 2nd, 1989. And I could take this information to say, to try to find a copy of this particular article. Now, there are a couple of different ways of doing that. I think in many ways, the easiest one is to work with an interlibrary borrowing librarian at your local public library, for example. If your public library will acquire articles for you, then that's a great, articles or books or journal articles, that's a great path to take. And if they do, please be sure to thank them, both in words and perhaps in financial support as well, because it's pretty important what they do. Now, I want to highlight one last thing before I go, and that is something called LibGuides. And so I'm going to try something here. If someone would like to put the name of one of those big universities that we saw here, I'm going to just choose one. I would like to choose a university randomly. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat right now, and if someone can toss in a university to try, I'm going to see if we can. My idea is to point out that every university has got LibGuides. Okay, well, I don't see anybody offering me a university to choose from. So, University of Wisconsin, thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I think University of Wisconsin, Madison is right here. I'm just going to use this because it'll take me to its library website. So if you were doing research on ancestors, if you wanted to look at newspapers in Wisconsin, this is such a great way to go. And I have not been to this website. I don't know what we're going to find here, but I am willing to bet that we will find a very good LibGuide here to help explain what resources are available. So I see research guides here. I'm going to take a look at that. And I'm going to try a subject guide, and then I'm going to go to newspapers. And look, they've got one, because every library does. That's the key. Wisconsin Historical Society newspaper collections. So if you're looking for historical newspapers, the librarian who put this together probably knows as much as anyone about what resources are available. And they give you a good overview here of what sort of information you might find. They've also got other newspapers, national newspapers, and some current newspapers. And so they can give you a good sense of where to go and what you can find. And these LibGuides, you probably also, oh, look, for the family historian, you can find all kinds of just great information that has been put together by the librarians at large and small at universities and colleges. So I think that that's a really great way to search. And I hope you'll keep that in mind, because I believe that in addition to using that discovery layer, which of course you can use for any subject at all, I believe that these LibGuides, especially the location-specific ones by the experts in those areas, are fantastic resources that really can be great. Look, Wisconsin Name Index. Well, perhaps you already knew about this. I of course I didn't, but that's the kind of thing that you can just find out. And the librarians who are making these are always staying on top of changes and updates and things like that. So I find that particularly useful. So what I'm going to do now is I just like to wrap up and say that I think that vessel research really can improve your family history research. It's just a small part of that. I know that, but of course, except for folks who came up from Central or South America or across the land bridge 10, 15,000 years ago, or came in the last 20, 50 or so years, pretty much everybody who came to America came by ship. And that's an important point. And so vessels have played an enormous role in our life today, and continue to do so since 90% of our goods come by ship. And we don't think about vessels as much as we used to, because people rarely travel by ship, and ideas don't travel by ship anymore, but they did, and knowledge, information traveled by ship. And that's one of the reasons why I think maritime history is so interesting and so important. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I thank you very much for your time. I'd be glad to try to answer some questions. There's a number of things I do, but there's a whole lot more I don't. So I apologize if I'm not able to answer all of your questions. Thank you very much.
Please type your question into the chat rather than unmuting yourself. That way Peter can see your question.
So I'll start with a question I see here about the best place to research transatlantic shipwrecks that occurred in the late 1840s. I actually, if you go to the shipindex.org site and then look at the resources that are in the database. Now, I show 100 resources at a time, but if I do Control F and do shipwreck, I find, shipwrecks of the Thunder Bay region. That's not transatlantic, of course, but Florida shipwrecks. You can go to the next page, and it is a little bit difficult if you have to go through each page. I recognize that as a challenge, but what it can do is identify resources that talk about shipwrecks. And those are the resources that are in the database. Another way to go would be to look at WorldCat. I was just looking about that. There was a question about shipwrecks in Nova Scotia that I think I mentioned, and I saw some resources that I don't. Well, here's, the shipwrecked passenger book, Sailing Westward from Europe for the Americas, 1817. So 1875, that could be a useful resource. This is not comprehensive, but these are the resources that are in the, it's pretty close to comprehensive, actually. So I hope that might be useful. Any tips to find an ancestor? I've got a question. Any tips to find an ancestor who is a ship's captain in the late 1700s? I'll have to think about that one for a little bit. That directory in the 1800s, if the name is not too common, you can actually search the database, because those 1800 ones, the directories from the mid to late 19th century include captains' names, though they may often be misspelled. 1700s, I guess it might depend on where they were based, but even then, I don't have a good answer for that. I'm really sorry. I'll see if something comes back to me. There's a question for searching Lake Erie ships of war in 1812, and someone mentioned the Erie Maritime Museum. They do have great information there. There is a war of the Navy Historical Society has published documents from the War of 1812, I believe. And yeah, this is actually something that I didn't mention that I meant to. Looking at Wikipedia can really be fantastically useful, because it will, when they have indexes, there's not much information. The Naval War, well, I'm going to check the War of 1812 entry and see what they have for a bibliography here. Naval has really thought that the Navy dictionary of naval. This bibliography certainly could be useful. Nope, Naval History of Great Britain. Well, that would be interesting from the English point of view. I am not seeing the resource that I thought existed. I'm sorry about that. I keep hoping it'll I hope that maybe this bibliography will be useful for learning a bit more about the vessels in the War of 1812. Kate asked, where would I find passenger lists from ports of departure such as Antwerp and others? Of course, I think I would think that the big genealogy databases like Ancestry and Find My Past and Family Search would probably be best to see what sort of documents they have there. There is the Passengers to America series by Tepper, I believe. They're interesting because they're all digitized. Clearly, you can tell by looking at the print pages, but they don't have an index to the vessels in the book. And surprisingly, I don't think that, I mean, all that work was done on a computer, but I don't think it's been put back onto a computer so that you could say, show all the vessels that sailed out of Antwerp in certain dates, which would be incredibly useful, I think. So I would look at, and I don't think that Tepper covered Netherlands or other smaller countries, to my knowledge, or Belgium, for example. So that might be useful, but I do think that that would be a point where the largest databases would be most useful. David asks, I'm researching the arrival of an ancestor. I have the arrival port, Baltimore, and the year 1781, but not the name of a vessel. How do I proceed? let me think for a second. I don't know exactly when customs houses started keeping track of vessels that were arriving. I think that's always an important thing to think about, is who is keeping track and writing down information, and who would have written that down, if anyone, and then where is that information now? Because 1781, of course, Castle Garden or Ellis Island is not going to be relevant, so that's not helpful. And even then, there weren't a lot of places that were recording information at that time. I do think that newspapers, this is another area where I think newspapers were incredibly valuable for recording that information. But and so if you looked at Baltimore newspapers, especially if you had a month to go on, a month or a date, then you could probably find the newspapers that would find a newspaper in Baltimore to record that would show arrivals at that time. So I'm going to jump back to this. I find this thing so useful. United States, Maryland. So the Baltimore Sun apparently was published since 1837. And so now it says pay. So who provides that? PQ Archiver. So obviously this needs to be updated as well. But my guess is, I'm going to use this as an example of another way that you can search for resources. You could do this in any large university database. Look for their list of e-journal titles. This will show you all of the ones that they have access to. This is provided by that EBSCO company that I mentioned before. Now, this is only telling us what this university, specifically Cornell in this case, has access to. And it says 1990 from Factiva, press reader, they don't have dates. All right, it's America's Historical. Okay, so here we have the Sun, which was, I believe we think is the Baltimore Sun, America's historical newspaper from 1837 to 1901. So I'm going to log in here and see what I find. And now in this case, of course, I am looking in the resources that I do have access to. But you could do the same if you were in a library that had access to this as well. You said 1781. Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. That's not going to help us. I guess I would go back to I find it hard to believe that so this is only showing us digitized newspapers. There are obviously print newspapers from Baltimore that chronicling America. I could go into here and I'm going to wrap this up in just a moment, just to see what we can. I don't know why I have to. All digitized newspapers. Okay, sorry. That's where I need to go. Maryland. Obviously, I need to learn a little bit about newspapers in Maryland. I'm not quite sure what this.
Peter, if I could jump in real quick,
Yes.
just from my own experience, I worked for a number of years with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and we had digitized all of the issues of the Colonial Virginia Gazette, and the Virginia Gazette newspaper often carried listings of ships that were hitting other ports in the Chesapeake. So again, getting to Peter's point, if you know the date or you know the month or something close to the year of 1781 where the ship came in, I would encourage you to do a search in the Virginia Gazette for that period via the Colonial Williamsburg website.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I do want to show, I guess I went away from that. That San Francisco Call page did show arrivals all up and down the West Coast. And So it was pretty useful for that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'd like to thank Peter for joining us today. It was a great presentation. I think everybody learned an awful lot. We have recorded this webinar, so it will be available for later viewing on the OGS website at ogs.org. And again, Peter, Mr. McCracken, thanks so much today. It was really interesting.
Great. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for attending.